everyone, and welcome to Bristol SEO. I can see there are around 68 people online at the moment, so I'll just wait a couple of minutes before I start the introduction, but thank you all for coming. There's over 200 of you signed up today, which is a huge record for us. We usually only have around 40 to 50 people come to the events in person, but obviously now we're online, we can reach a much bigger audience, which is really nice. It gives everyone the opportunity to learn more about SEO. Now, 7:22. Cool. Oops. Okay, I will get started. So we've got a lot of new faces here tonight. So I'll start by doing a quick introduction to Bristol SEO and what we're all about. So Bristol SEO is a monthly SEO meetup that I started back in May 2018. And this is the 18th meetup that we have done. We usually have 2 or 3 speakers give talks on a different range of SEO topics. This is our first online event. Usually we'd be in a room that looks like this, with lots of pizza and drinks to go along with the talks and a trip to the pub afterwards. But because of the coronavirus pandemic, we've decided to go online for the first time, and it's also our 2nd birthday, so what better way to celebrate? You can follow me on my Twitter at FayWatt to find out more about upcoming events and sign up to our event page on meetup.com. I will also be sharing a recording of this webinar on my website, faywatt.com. And please feel free to tweet throughout this webinar using the hashtag BristolSEO. We are sponsored by Seeker Digital, which is where I work as the SEO manager. Seeker specializes in SEO for e-commerce and SaaS companies, as well as outreach and link building. You can find out more about Seeker by visiting our website, seeker.digital. So tonight we have 3 speakers, and the first speaker is Jess Hobbs, who is the Technical SEO Consultant at Erudite agency, and she will be presenting on how to identify on-page SEO opportunities using ScreamingFrog custom extractions. Then we have Ruth Everett, who is a technical SEO exec at DeepCrawl and spends her time learning and communicating the latest developments in the search space. Ruth will be talking us through the fundamentals of Python and how we can automate SEO audit tasks. Our third and final speaker is Faisal Anderson, who is a technical SEO consultant at LiveArea and has spoken at industry events like SearchLove and Reading SEO. Faisal will be showing us how log file analysis can provide detailed insights into how bots behave when crawling your website. There will be an opportunity at the end to ask speakers some questions, so please feel free to post these in the chat throughout the webinar, and I will select 3 questions per speaker. First up tonight, we have Jess, who's going to be presenting on ScreamingFrog and custom extractions. So Jess, if you'd like to share your screen and we can get started.
Great, can you see me?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi guys, yeah, I'm Jess. I'm a technical SEO consultant at Erudite. We're an agency, we specialize in kind of technical stuff and CRO, web analytics, that kind of thing, down in Hampshire. So today I'm going to talk about some of the fundamentals of using ScreamingFrog custom extractions to automate some of those kind of slightly lengthier kind of on-page tasks that you might want to do, competitor research, that kind of thing. So first we're going to talk about very briefly what is ScreamingFrog and what it does kind of out of the box as standard. Then we are going to talk about a little bit about custom extractions, what you can use them for, why they're useful. We are going to touch on custom search as well, but we're not going to dive into that too deeply today because we've not got that much time. We will go through a few examples of how you could use it in action, talk about some other ideas that you could try to use these custom extractions, and also at the end we're going to cover off different types of extractor that you can use. So What is ScreamingFrog? Basically, ScreamingFrog is a website crawler that gathers data from URLs it discovers. So you can plonk it on a start URL and it will spider out, and depending on what kind of criteria you set it, it will gather loads of different information on each of those URLs. Or you can just paste in a list and it will crawl through the list. It does absolutely tons out of the box. It's really, really cool. I'm not going to go through everything it does just now, but these are a few of the things that you can expect from a kind of standard crawl. So what is a custom extraction? So the trouble with all of these sorts of standard things is that if you want to extract data that's specific to your particular site, it doesn't come out of the box. So you can use a custom extraction or custom search to gather information using a custom selector. So you could use regex, you can use CSX selectors or XPath selectors. Custom search is really similar to custom extractions, but effectively, rather than searching for a particular selector and then extracting what's within that selector, it will search for a specific string. So that could look like a tracking ID, like a Facebook pixel, or a GTN tag, or a GA tag, or anything like that. Or it could be a text string on the page. So if you wanted to gather a list of all of your products that are out of stock, or maybe you want to gather a list of, this was facetious of me, properties with hot tubs, not particularly topical at the moment on Airbnb or something, you could search search for those sorts of text strings. So a couple of examples. Say we want to write a blog about home improvements or start creating a bit of content on home improvement type of thing, and you want to do a bit of competitor research to gather some content ideas. The first example I've chosen is collecting pricing data from rated people. So rated people, they're similar to kind of MyBuilder or Checkatrade. They're basically a director for tradesmen. And they have this really nice section of their site, which is cost guides, which is basically content on all kinds of different common kind of house projects and what you can expect to pay roughly for them. And what we see here is what's quite nice is it has a really clear, it will be between X and Y price on each of these pages. So in order to start to scrape these with ScreamingFrog, what we want to do is in Chrome, right click on your first one, hit inspect, and then find it on the right hand side here in the little developer tab. You can find your element, right click again, copy, and copy selector. Like that. Jump over to ScreamingFrog, go into configuration and then custom and then extraction. And you'll get a little box that pops up like this. On the left here, you can name your extractor. So when it gets extracted, you know what it is. And you can paste in what you just copied, what's on your clipboard in this little path here. Make sure that drop down in the middle says CSS path because that's what you've selected. A few things before you crawl, not custom extraction related, but just useful. If you're about to start your first crawl, make sure robots.txt is configured the right way. So if for some reason the area of the site you want to crawl and extract from is blocked at robots.txt, you need to jump in there and allow. Just make sure that all works. Check your include and exclude configuration. So in this case, I'm just going to crawl the cost guide section. So I'm just going to include using the include configuration, that subfolder. Check your user agent. Some sites don't like ScreamingFrog, so you could use Googlebot or Bingbot or any of those kind of things. And also just check your spider configuration. Make sure it's set to crawl outside of start folders if you want to, that kind of thing. Yay, and you get this really nice list. So you can see here, it spat out a list of our minimum price and our maximum price for all of the pages in this subfolder. You just need to jump over to the custom extraction tab. The next one we're going to look at is collecting Q&A content from Homebase. So if we wanted to gather some ideas from Homebase as a kind of a basis for our keyword research or our competitor research, Homebase have a really nice content section as well, with loads of content like this. So it's kind of H1 is a question, and then a bit of answer content. So again, we repeat the same process, right click, copy selector. I'm not going to go through again how to paste it into ScreamingFrog, but just go to configuration and then custom extraction. And then same thing, it spits out this lovely list when we jump over to the custom extractions tab of all of the questions that they've asked. So my builder have a kind of a similar thing going on, so this could be really useful for us. They have an Ask a Tradesman section, which is effectively a forum where you can ask tradesmen your DIY questions or your sort of home improvement project questions. So on these particular pages, the actual question there, how to paint onto plaster, is an H1. So that's going to be collected or gathered as standard. So we don't need to do anything with that. But what we've got underneath there is the amount of answers and also the category that sort of question sits within. Now, this might be really, really useful for us in this kind of an aspect, because my builder actually have about 40,000 questions and answers, which you're not going to want to kind of dive into, probably all of those. But by being able to extract how many answers each of those has had, we can kind of start to prioritize, because we can look at what's had a lot of engagement, which would imply there's probably a lot of interest there, and perhaps more opportunity there. And then finally at the end, you've got a top answer. So we repeat the process again for each of those. We're using CSS paths again, name the extractions again, something a bit like that. And you can see here, not only have we got the number of answers per question, which is kind of handy use information, we've got the answer, so we can begin to look at what kind of topics they've covered, that kind of thing. And we've also got information about the actual subject that sits within, the topic that sits within. We can use a bit further down the line. So there's loads of other things that you could use these kinds of custom extractions for. So identifying product pages without reviews. If you wanted to try and pull off a list, maybe on a client site or your own site, of your products that don't yet have a review, you could use the same kind of a process. You could use a custom search as well to search for the particular string that's shown on the page. If there's no reviews, like no reviews yet for this product, or you could literally extract that CSS selector or that XPath or whatever, and pull off that list. Extracting all the body copy on a page, sometimes that's really useful when you want to kind of dive in a bit deeper on kind of keyword targeting, that kind of thing, topics included, and you can do that normally on most sites just by using p tags. You could pull author names from articles across the site, or identify blog posts that don't have an author yet, maybe need to be reviewed. You could do the same for like last modified dates, you could pull those. Finding Google Analytics tags, GTM tags, and checking for multiples, this can be really interesting. So if ScreamingFrog pulls or finds more than one sort of element with your chosen selector, it will return multiple extractions. So in some cases, you see maybe if a site's been pushed live, a new site, and it has a live GA tag, and it also has their kind of dead site GA tag. This can be a really nice way of pulling out those, or it could be a way to check that they've all moved across properly, every single page has one, all of that kind of thing. hreflang, this can be really useful, especially when you've got a bit of a maze of hreflang tags. You can extract those and use that to check those. Extracting headings below H2. So ScreamingFrog doesn't as standard extract anything below an H2, but obviously lots of pages have H3s, H4s, H5s. So if you want to look in a bit more detail at page structure, or look at subheadings and that kind of thing that your competitors are using, you can extract headings below the H2s. And you can look up things like ordered lists, unordered lists, bullet points, all of that kind of stuff. Pretty much anything that's on the site you can extract. You can also look at, like I said, extracted article, published dates, revised dates, that kind of thing. So the next thing I want to talk about very quickly is the other extractor types that you can use. So in the examples we covered, we only looked at CSS selectors, and they're generally the most straightforward ones. But sometimes if you want to extract something that's not rendered on the page, or if multiple elements on the page use the same CSS selector, put my teeth back in, that can be a little bit tricky, or you can get extractions being returned that you didn't want. So XPaths can be extracted in exactly the same way. Right-click, inspect, right-click, copy, and just below copy selector, you've got the option to copy an XPath as well. So these are really, really great for scraping, particularly. And there's lots of different XPath expressions you can use to get some more specific and sophisticated extractions. I don't think I've got time to go into them in too much detail, but effectively it's really similar to regex. You've got all these kinds of expressions. So for example, this little line of XPath expression would take anything with the item prop availability and return the content. So effectively what this means is it finds anything in that availability markup, which could result in a list like this. So it can return all of your in-stock, out-stock, pre-order products. And the last one you can use is regex, which is particularly useful when you want to extract something that isn't actually rendered on the page. So anything JavaScript based, anything like that, JSON LD structured data as well. So in this case, it's literally extract the GTM ID. So that little asterisk is the wildcard that looks for that GTM dash and then returns whatever is after it. This is another good example you could use if you wanted to find all of the types of JSON LD structured data on a page. So say you've got a list of competitors that may be outranking you or are beating you for featured snippets, you could scrape all of the types of JSON LD structured data that are included on their site, rather than the actual content. So it could be product, reviews, local business, organization, that kind of thing when I say type. So that's it for me today. I hope you all found it useful. I'm sure Faye will share all the slides, but if not, I will tweet them in a bit for you all. Thanks very much.
Be sharing all the slides, and this will also be recorded, and you should receive a recording of this at some point this evening, I think. I'll also be sharing everything on my website as well. I can't wait to get started on some of those ScreamingFrog extractions. It's not something I use all that much, and I never would have thought to extract like the H3s and H4s with it. So yeah, I'm pretty excited to get started on that. So up next, we have Ruth, who's going to be talking through the fundamentals of Python and SEO and how we can automate SEO tasks. Ruth, if you'd like to share your screen, and we can get started.
So I hope you can all see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it wants to load. Cool. So, hello everyone, I'm Ruth. I'm a technical SEO at Deepcrawl. And this is my dog, Amber. I always like to give her a shout out at the start because she likes to help me and get involved with projects that I work on, as you can see here. So what I'm going to be talking today is this problem. SEOs are busy people. We often have to wear a lot of hats, have a lot of tasks we have to do and deadlines. But there is a solution to this in the form of automation, and more specifically, automating and data analysis using Python. So what I'm going to cover today is how I got started with Python, what Python is and how it can be used, and how it can help with our technical SEO. So my journey with Python started like this. I don't have a background in data science or computer science. I'm just a curious SEO who saw people talking about Python and thought, I'll give this a go and see what the hype is all about. And this is me now. I feel a lot more comfortable and confident using it. I've been applying it in my day job and I'm really enjoying what I've been doing so far with it. So I've been inspired by a lot of people in the industry to get started. Namely, this is Hamlet Batista. He writes a lot for Search Engine Journal and his articles are usually really actionable. And Brittany from Moz, she speaks a lot about how machine learning can be used to help with our marketing. There's also Paul Shapiro. He did a really interesting Whiteboard Friday where he spoke about programming languages for SEOs, and he touched on how Python can be used. And Tyler Ridden also did a talk at the end of last year where he spoke about how programming languages like Python are going to be replacing the need for Excel with our advanced technical SEO. And Hamlet also did a webinar with us where he spoke about how to generate text for images at scale. And this was really the catalyst for me to get started learning, so I realized what you could actually do with this. And when I was researching into Python, I discovered that some of the biggest companies in the world use it. Companies like NASA, Instagram, Spotify, Uber, they all use it to power their platforms and for their data analysis. And Google have also been using it since the beginning. Their first web crawler was actually built using Python, and it remains one of their official server-side languages. And YouTube also use it as it's fast enough for them to produce maintainable features, but with efficiency. And that's the key word. We can do lots of things with efficiency using Python. And there's several different ways you can go about learning, depending on your learning style. So for me, the Code Academy computer science course was really useful. And this is a 20-week online course, which has a mixture of theory and practical projects, as well as a code console where you can play around and test bits of code that you've been learning. There's also Data Camp, which is more of a video-based learning style. This has a wide range of skill tracks like data visualization. There's also chatbots that you could build using a Data Camp course. And this covers interactive exercises and has a wide range of challenges and projects. There's also Solo Learn, which is a great free mobile app that allows you to learn Python on the go when we all start to be on the go again. And this has over 200 practice questions and even a code playground, so you can code on your phone. And Code Combat is a little bit different. This is a video game style website where you basically control your character using Python commands. So it's a great way to learn. So what is Python? Python is an open source interactive programming language, and it's interpreted line by line. So the code gets written in the terminal and then results are generated below. As you can see here, it goes through each line and then prints out the results. And you can run Python a number of different ways. If you're on Mac, you can run it through your terminal. If you're on Windows, you can use the command line. But there's also some cloud-based alternatives such as Google Colab and Jupyter Notebooks. And these are great ways to practice different lines of code and chunks of code, and then also share what you've been doing as well. But the main power of Python is in the libraries. So these allow for a number of additional extras such as data extraction, scientific computing, natural language processing, machine learning, and these are some of the useful libraries which can be used for SEO tasks. So how can Python help with technical SEO, and why should we care? So while having a knowledge of the programming languages that power our websites is really important, having an understanding of Python can also help us to automate repetitive tasks that usually could take us hours to do, as well as things like data extraction and analysis. Obviously, the data that we're dealing with now is only growing, so this can help us to solve those complex problems that we wouldn't normally be able to see just looking at a big pile of data. And this is obviously going to lead to efficiency and time saving, and it's future-proofing our jobs as things become more automated. So say, for example, you spend 5 hours a week using Excel. That adds up to over 20 hours a month, which is over 200 hours a year. So just imagine what we could achieve if we spent this time on those other important optimization tasks that can't be automated. So I have a quick example here of something that I've been helping a client on recently. And this was to see how relevant their redirects were after a migration. So we essentially took a crawl before and after a redirect. We split it to pull out the category and the amount of slashes to get the depth. And we then used some simple operators here to see if they were the same or different pre or post redirect. And as you can see here, this was over 180,000 rows of data. And when you're playing with that much data in Excel, it can give us a bit of a headache. And this is also reusable. So you could use this for any client, upload any crawl, just segment it based on the website, and you can reuse the script over and over again. And just like with Excel, you can also perform pivot tables to get a real top level view of the amount of category matches and segment matches that you have compared the two. And it's because of all of this that Python is growing in popularity within SEO, because it allows us to better understand our data and make more data-driven decisions. And we can then provide concrete insights to our clients and stakeholders and have confidence in those recommendations. And of course, it allows us to focus on those other important efforts. And there's lots of things that you can automate with Python, lots of SEO tasks, such as finding parameters, checking for 404s, optimizing images, scraping websites. And I'm just going to share a couple of scripts that I've been using recently that can help with some common challenges that we all face. So the first challenge is missing alt text. And obviously alt text is important for image search and for accessibility. But there is a solution with image captioning. And this uses Pythia, which is a modular framework. And essentially what it does is it looks at an image and it weights different parts of the image in order to understand what the image contains. And you can run this all in a Google Colab notebook. It will do all of the steps for you. As you can see here, you just need to insert your image URL. It will then give you a button where you can caption the image, and it will then generate a caption below the image, as you can see here. But it is worth noting that it is a machine and it's still learning, so it's not going to be perfect every time. For example, it thought this picture of some pandas was actually a herd of sheep. So it's always best to check the results just in case. Another challenge is broken pages. So I used to work for an agency and we had a large e-commerce client who would have products that were very seasonal and they would just turn the page off when they were done with it. And this obviously caused a lot of broken pages and a bad user experience. But using a script called crawl404, you're able to read your sitemap file. It's then going to search for every href attribute to get the valid links from every page. It will check the link response code for these and export all of your 404 errors to a text file, and then you can redirect that accordingly. And the last challenge is large image file sizes. So obviously these are bad for page speed and user experience, but using an aptly named script called optimize images, you're able to optimize either a single image or a folder that contains multiple images. And I have an example here of an old blog that I used to have. As you can see, the page speed score was 59, and the biggest recommendation was to serve images in a next generation format. So I took these images off the page, put them in a folder, and ran it through this script. And as you can see here, it optimized them by 31%. I then re-uploaded them to the site, ran it through page speed insights again, and you can see the score's gone up to 77, and that's saving about 7 seconds of load time. So obviously images aren't the only thing that impact page speed, but they are a big factor, and this script can help with that. And as you can see, there's no difference between the original and the optimized version. It's literally just the file size that's changing, not the quality. And Googlers have also been sharing Python code recently, such as this interesting one that John Mueller shared in a discussion about how breadcrumbs can impact PageRank. So using this script, you can build a test site with the number of categories, subcategories, and items, and it will then run a theoretical PageRank through that page using a damping factor of 0.85. And you can determine how your PageRank may differ depending on whether you have breadcrumbs on the page or not. And you can even visualize it here, your site structure based on the number of categories that you have. And the best thing about all of these scripts is that you don't need to know any coding yourself in order to use them. You just need to invest a little bit of time to get them set up on your local environment, and then you can run them literally within minutes and just reuse them over and over again to perform these low-level tasks. But really, that's just scratching the surface with what's possible. You can also perform log file analysis, validate your hreflangs, perform competitor analysis, and automate your page speed audits. And the best way to go about adding Python into your workflow is to think about what you can automate. So when you're performing those tasks, those low-level tasks that are really time-consuming, think about a way that you can automate them and see if there's a script available. And if not, think about how you could write one yourself. And this was the best piece of advice that I was given, because it made me think when I was performing some page speed tests, there must be a way to automate this, because using page speed insights, you have to do it URL by URL. So I thought there must be a way of using the API in Python in order to automate this. So I went away and I together this script, which essentially allows you to upload a CSV file of URLs. You can then loop that file through the PageSpeed API, and it's going to pull out the metrics that you set into a data frame, and you can then use this to visualize that data. You can use it to monitor and measure, and it's just a great way to automate that task. But you can also have fun with it. It doesn't have to all be about SEO. So I created this bot that used Python, Telegram, and the Random Dog API to send a picture of a dog every time you type in the word bot, just in case you need it if you're having an off day. And you can also use the Pygame library to create your own video game using Python, which is a great way to learn as well. And Python is also a popular language for powering machine learning, and this is due to its accessible syntax and the libraries it has. And machine learning is an application of artificial intelligence that allows systems to learn without needing to be programmed. And it does this by running a Python script to train the computer using a data set that you give it. It will then summarize and visualize this data and evaluate the algorithms and make predictions for you. And machine learning is being used all the time. We're interacting with it on a daily basis. And in some cases, we're even helping to train it. So Google use it for a lot of their algorithms like BERT and PageRank. Baidu also use it for their voice search. A lot of the chatbots that we interact with, they're also using machine learning, such as this one from Domino's Pizza, which allows you to order a pizza completely through Facebook Messenger without needing to talk to a single human. And Spotify and Netflix also use it for their personalized recommendations. But there's also some SEO things that we can do with machine learning too, such as evaluating content quality, optimizing title tags, transcribing audio, and also performing predictive analysis based on a data set that we give it. So essentially, Python is the future of SEO. And this is because it's allowing us to understand and solve those complex problems faster. It also allows us to make more data-driven decisions and have confidence in the decisions that we're making. And of course, it allows us to focus our time and efforts on those other important optimization activities that can't be automated, that do need that human touch. But the truth is really, honestly, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't have a background, like I said, in data science or computer science. I'm literally just having fun learning it and applying it to my day job. It's really cool to see how it can be used for SEO and how it can help with our clients. But I do have a few tips for anyone who is looking to get started. So you can talk to your developers. There's a high chance the developers that you work with will have an understanding of Python. So you can talk to them, see if there's something you can collaborate on, especially if it's going to help your website. You can also join online communities. So the Python community is huge, and there's tons of Slack channels and Reddit threads that you can go to if you need help with anything. And most importantly, just keep practicing and have fun. Don't put too much pressure on yourself to learn as fast as everyone else is. Just do it in your own time and the way that best suits you. And a great way to get started is the 100 Days of Code Challenge. And this is where you code for 100 days straight. And this is a great way to form a habit of coding and even start your own project. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the professional services team at DeepCool. They're doing some really clever and innovative stuff, and I've learned so much from them. And we're looking forward to being able to share some of the stuff that we've been doing as well. So just some key takeaways. Python can help technical SEOs increase their efficiency by automating those low-level tasks. Being able to better understand the data that we're extracting is going to lead to us making better decisions and having confidence in those decisions. And anyone can learn Python. You just need to have a little bit of commitment, fun, and see what you can create with it. And here's some useful resources for anyone who is looking to get started. Thank you.
Challenge about 5 times now, giving up each time. But I do need to get back into it, and I'm particularly interested in about learning Python. So it's really useful to see how it can help with automating SEO tasks. I've got some questions for you afterwards, actually. So up next, we have Faisal, who's going to be talking about log file analysis. So Faisal, if you'd like to share your screen, and we can get started.
If you can see everything. Is that all good? Did that work? No worries. Okay, cool. Yes, a bit different doing online, isn't it? You have to check every time. But anyway, yes. So I'm going to be talking about spying on Google. Just for a bit of background, I work with a company called LiveArea. We're a global commerce agency. Work around the world with a number of brands, increasing online revenue. But yeah, if you are a bit of a nerd like me, you've probably imagined if you could actually spy on Google's activity and actually really understand what it's doing. And there is actually a way to understand exactly how your site is being crawled. And that way you can quickly identify crawling and indexation issues and diagnose any problems that you're having for yourself or for your client. And this reveals absolutely massive wins, and it has for me, and that's what this talk is all about. It's about log file analysis, which gives you the tools to actually do all of what I said before. And log file analysis, it sounds kind of dull, sounds kind of boring, but actually it's an incredibly powerful tool that's very simple. It's not as complicated as it sounds, because whenever a request from a user or a crawler is made to a server, that's stored in a log file. And that sounds really simple, but that has huge potential. It's actual recorded data. And you might be wondering, well, okay, that sounds great, but I normally use Search Console for my crawling and indexation issues. Why would I bother using something that's more complicated and more difficult to implement? Well, that's because, one, data accuracy is not guaranteed in Search Console. You might get things like search and crawl anomalies and other messages you may not understand. To my knowledge, at the moment, the API for Search Console coverage isn't beyond 1,000 rows. You can only get 1,000 rows from the GUI, and the GUI is not that great, let's just admit it. And also, Google owns that data. It's telling you what it wants you to see. So you have to take that in mind as well. So I would say Search Console is probably out. But then you could use other crawling tools. Why bother with log file analysis? Why not just use what we already use all the time, like ScreamingFrog or Botify or Deep Crawl? I should really mention them. Well, the truth is that Googlebot is incredibly smart. And a lot of the time it's actually smarter than a lot of the crawlers that we have at our disposal. And that's not because, obviously, of the amazing work these companies do. It's just because Google has a lot more data, and also they don't reveal everything that bots do. There's not an open guide to how they behave. So Googlebot is actually incredibly smart. And that's why log file analysis, I think, really wins over Search Console and traditional crawling tools, because Googlebot's incredibly smart and we can monitor exactly what it does using log file analysis. But how do we actually go about doing log file analysis? Because it's quite a comprehensive thing to do. Well, if you're anything like me, if you're working with a team or managing a team, or if you're scaling stuff, I guess everyone's remote now, but if you're doing it remote teams in different countries, etc., you've got to have a set process for implementing anything, including log file analysis. So how I prepare it is using a 2-stage process with each one having 3 steps. So let's have a look at the first one. So the first one is data preparation. So we're just getting all of our data so that we can analyze it properly. And really, this is a 3-step process. There's retrieving the log files as our first one, which is probably the absolute hardest part. This is because clients don't necessarily know what log files are. It sort of puts them to sleep if you start talking about it. So what I do, if I don't know the client very well, if we're still in the initial stages, so for example, I work a lot on solutions implementations, so starting with new websites and new platforms, I need to message the developers and understand exactly what they're doing right off the bat. I may not have the relationships built yet with key stakeholders. So what you want to do is create an email that has these 3 elements within them. And we're going to go through each of them. But the first one is determining the hosting setup. So the reason why you need to determine this is because there are many common scenarios that you'll encounter with the website that will change where its log files are stored. So, for example, most of us think that all websites just come off of one server. We'll just make a request to that one server. Unfortunately, that's not the case, because especially with larger websites or high traffic websites, they're going to be utilizing things like load balancing, where traffic is split amongst multiple different servers, and therefore the logs are on different servers as well. Or you may be using an edge, or you may be using a content delivery network, and that means your logs are going to be stored in another location. So we need to consider all of these things and include it in our email. The second step is asking whether the host name is in the data. By host name, I mean the root domain and the protocol. Those are 2 really essential bits of data, because on the server, that's not essential for it to know. If you think about it, if all of the requests are for the same website, why would it need to store all that repeat data? It's just bloat. But for us, it's incredibly important as SEOs, because just having a slug doesn't really help us. So we need to ask whether the host name is in the data, or what data is associated with what host name, because you don't want to be looking at data that's from an insecure URL, for example. The other thing as well, which is probably a bit more obvious, is getting as much data as possible. If you're doing quite an in-depth audit, I'd say 6 months is probably the minimum you're wanting to have, because the more data you have, the more facts you can extract. So now we've got our email ready and we've sent that off. Hopefully what you're going to get from your developers is a ton of log files. And it's probably going to come in this particular format, because log files aren't generally kept in one individual file. They're normally spread amongst multiple. But to analyze it, we all need it in one readable file. So what we can do, we can use either Bash or PowerShell or command line. And we can just run these simple commands that basically join the text files together. Now, what I tend to do is join them up into a CSV, because that's readable for most tools. For the ScreamingFrog log file analyzer, quite a long name, you have to redirect log, but in a lot of tools you can use CSV. But we'll go over the tools in a minute, because we want to choose the best one for the situation that we're in. So when we're getting all our data, there's a couple of tools we can use. I like to cycle between 3. So Excel is the one that we all know and love, and this is really great for sort of small, simple tests. So if you're doing your own tests and trying to test your own theories on how Googlebot behaves, this is fantastic. It's easy to use. I've actually got a guide on this on Moz if you want some more in-depth information on that. But we're not going to be covering it in this particular talk, because Excel can only handle a certain amount of data. And there are ways to extend that amount of data that you can analyze. But I find that actually using the ScreamingFrog log file analyzer when you're looking at larger data sets is a much stronger option. And this is because it gives you lots of visualizations right off the bat. It gives you lots of organized data that you need. So, for example, if you're working with a client that's working across different markets and not all of them are just focused on Google, you can actually look at the crawl behavior of different bots in a really nice, pretty graph, which is fantastic. And the log file analyzer is pretty easy to use, and they have fantastic documentation. I'd highly recommend checking it out. But unfortunately, you can't create custom reports, because that's not what it's designed to do. It's quite like the ScreamingFrog SEO spider. It's not designed to do data visualization, at least for most things. So that's where Jupyter comes in, and Python. And Jupyter and Python is fantastic because it's free, so it's quite easy to talk with your company about getting it. It's very good at handling very large files with absolute ease. It does have a bit of a learning curve, but if you listen to the prior talk, you probably know how to learn Python and all that wizardry yourself from that. But the absolute biggest benefit is that the code is recyclable. I'm going to be sharing some scripts with you during this talk as well, so you can follow along with everything I do, and you don't necessarily need to learn to code. You can just reuse my code for your own purposes. And that'll be a download that I'll share at the end. So in this talk, we're going to be talking about Jupyter and Python. Okay, so now we've got everything we need to start analyzing, and we finished the data preparation stage. Now we're going to look at the data analysis stage, and I prefer to split this into 3. So in terms of areas, I look at things like crawl behavior, crawl budget waste, and site health. That generally covers most of what you need to know about a site. Quick story time. So I was actually analyzing a site that had lots of job pages, like absolutely everything, completely generated. nothing that was actually manually done. And the problem with this was that it was actually causing a huge amount of problems in terms of crawl depth. So a bot was having to go 12 links in to actually find any of the content. So I knew this theoretically was going to be the case where the bot was going to be able to crawl everything, but I needed to prove it to stakeholders, because if you're trying to make your case for SEO, it can be hard sometimes, but with log file analysis, you can actually get some really good insights and create pretty charts that they'll understand. So as the first part of analyzing crawl budget and crawl behavior, was I looked at crawl frequency by depth and internal links. And this gives us a really good insight of how many internal links do we need to get things properly crawled, and at what stage and what crawl depth works. So to do this, we're needing to combine ScreamingFrog SEO spider data with our log file data. Now, don't worry about the Python. You're going to be able to download this at the end. But what I did was I loaded in my log file. So I got all of this information, such as the time, date of the crawl, and the address. And then I read in my spider export and got the crawl depth and the inlinks. Then I merged this data together so I could see what URLs were crawled at what time, but also what crawl depth they're at. And then I basically looked at the unique number of times a particular crawl depth appeared. Now, obviously, this isn't real world data. This is just a test. But you can see that a crawl depth of 0, there were 10 requests made. A crawl depth of 1, there were 7 requests made. Obviously, with the client example, there was a lot more information here. But this is the sort of report you're going to see. Then I also looked at how often was something crawled by the number of inlinks. There's an extra little report. Now, this isn't actually my chart. This is from Built Visible, but I can't unfortunately show you actual charts from our clients. But basically, you can produce something like this. You can look at the number of requests made by click depth. And this is actually quite clear to explain to a client. They're going to understand what this means. So when I'm demonstrating to clients, they can understand the ROI on it and why they would try and improve this. And that means you can push through a recommendation. The second area of analysis I tend to look at is crawl budget waste. So essentially, that's with larger websites, it's especially important to have a website that can be completely crawled. If your website is absolutely huge, Google will assign it a crawl budget. And that means only a certain amount of it will be crawled because it's inefficient for Google to actually crawl that information. I think it takes like the power of a house, enough power to power a full house for Google to crawl a massive website. So they're obviously keen to conserve energy and conserve money. So you've got to consider crawl budget. Yeah, as I said, they have a particular budget that's assigned to you. So let's dive into another case study to show you what I mean. Now, this isn't actually my case study. This is something I learned at ScreamingFrog from the head of Technical SEO, Chris Jones. But it's really interesting because he's looking at infinite crawl paths. Now, an infinite crawl path is basically where on a page you have something referenced that causes Googlebot to crawl the same link if it's self-referencing again and again and again. And you might have seen this in the ScreamingFrog SEO spider if you're auditing a website. So what will happen is the crawler will just crawl and crawl this link until it has an existential crisis or just stops. And obviously I knew that in theory, but interestingly, Chris Jones showed me that Googlebot is a lot smarter than I thought, because actually Googlebot figured this out. It figured out that it was an infinite crawl path and stopped crawling at crawl depth of 2, which is actually quite a bit earlier than normally what it does, at least for sites with a good amount of authority. So I actually had a scientific insight into how Googlebot works, and that's incredibly powerful for you as an SEO, but also for talking to clients about crawl budget. So how do we actually have a look at crawl budget? What's some cool things you can do? Well, one thing I like to do is look at crawl frequency by subdirectory, because it's good to understand whether a particular subdirectory, so for example, a news section or a PLP, those have higher crawling rates than other pages that aren't regularly updated. You want those pages to be crawled more regularly because you have more content you want Google to discover. The other thing as well is looking at things like you don't want parameters to be crawled a lot, because if you're looking at search parameters, that's just bloat. You're not wanting Google to crawl all of those parameters in most cases. So how do we have a look at this information? Well, you can use this nifty script to basically just take all the URLs and find the subfolders. It then looked at the amount of times a unique subfolder occurred within the log file. So in this example, you can see that JS subfolder was requested 45 times, whereas download misspelled download was requested 44 times, and download/cats was requested 3 times. So that's immediate insight right there. Then I guess the final stage of analysis that I normally look at is site health. So we often think about how is our site doing in terms of crawling, how is Google crawling our site? We don't think about how our site is responding to crawling. So if you're dealing with a specifically large website, sometimes you can have some errors when crawling is happening. So for example, if your site is responding with the wrong status code. So, sorry, maybe mucked up there. But anyway, point is, I had a particular case study that demonstrates this. So I basically had a client where it was a particularly large e-commerce site, and they had a very interesting case where Googlebot had changed from mobile-first indexing to desktop-based indexing. So the crawler had actually changed and was being reported in Search Console. And this was because, in my opinion, the reason why this was happening, what I thought was happening, the site was absolutely huge. There was a lot of products, and it was just, it was obvious that Google was probably giving up in crawling the whole site. And the other problem it had was that it was using dynamic serving. So basically, it had the mobile version of the website as well as the desktop version of the website. And the mobile version was much larger and much more difficult to crawl than the desktop one. So when I decided to try and prove this, I originally wanted to crawl the site and test it out. But if I was using traditional crawling tools, this would be a lot more difficult because there are 2 versions of this massive site to be able to crawl. So this is where we could use log file analysis to prove my theory. So one thing I noticed when crawling the mobile site was that on a Monday, you were having 200 responding pages, but those same pages later on in the week when it was high traffic, they're responding with a 500 response. So basically it wasn't able to deal with the amount of pressure of crawling. And I could prove this by looking at the status codes of all the pages in my log files. And then I could create a pivot table looking at the URLs by status code and see the number of times a particular request responded with that status code. Obviously, this is quite an amount of information. What I could actually do was filter out the ones where I was getting the most inconsistencies. I could actually identify exactly the URLs that were producing these inconsistencies, which you'll be able to download the scripts for. So what I actually found out was that the mobile version of the site was having a lot more status code issues and inconsistent server responses than the desktop one. I believe it's because they had a reverse proxy hosting the mobile site compared to the desktop one. And along with understanding this, I also wanted to go a bit deeper for stakeholders and show them exactly where the problems were occurring in terms of the inconsistent server responses. So I took some of the code that I had earlier. As I said, a lot of this code is recyclable, so useful in lots of different ways. And I got the subdirectories. I looked at the status codes that occurred with URLs in those particular subdirectories, and I produced another pivot table. And that way I could demonstrate clearly to clients that there was an ROI here. There are certain parts of their website they needed to improve in terms of server architecture to support all of this crawling. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. You can download all of these scripts at this URL. This should be live and working. Message me if it's not. But yeah, you can download all the scripts there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Faisal. That was really interesting. I really want to get involved in log file analysis more. Is it worth doing log file analysis on every website or only ones that have a certain size or traffic?
For very large sites and news sites, I'd say are probably the most common where it's very useful. Yeah, I'd say normally large sites, but then I do a lot of like little testing. If you want to understand Googlebot, that can be quite useful for smaller sites. You can perform on any size of site if you like. I would say with smaller sites, it's still relevant if you wanted to test redirects. So if you actually want to see if your redirects are properly being implemented and Googlebot is following all of those 301s, that can still be useful. So I'd say any size, but it depends on the context.
Okay. And a question for Jess. Can you suggest a good course or resource to grasp regex?
Oh, good question. To to be honest, I just learnt by doing. I think that's probably the best way to do it, is to try and apply it where possible. I found the ScreamingFrog robots text tester is really good to play around with, because you can just enter random stuff, play around and see if it works in kind of real time. So that's quite good fun. So I would definitely suggest that. But in terms of like courses and stuff, I haven't done any, so I can't recommend them, I'm afraid.
A question for Ruth. What are the benefits of using Python for identifying 404s or large images over a tool like ScreamingFrog, for example?
Obviously, it's free, so you can use the scripts, download them, and have them running locally, and you don't have to pay anything to run them. It's also faster. Python is super fast, so you can just run it through really quickly and just get that as an insight rather than having your whole crawl. You can just see, your 404s. You don't have to go through all of the rest of the data.
Yeah, I guess you're less likely to crash a site with Python and ScreamingFrog. A question for Faisal. When you first get access to a client's log files, what are your go-to checks before you move on?
Yeah, good question. I'd say the first thing I check is obviously data accuracy. So that's why I think it's really important. Like, I would normally say, like, when trying to get log files, just make sure you're specifying that you're getting the right thing, because if you get the wrong data, you're making completely wrong insights. And I've done that before. I'm guilty of it. When I first started out with it, misunderstanding what was going on. I'd say like go-to checks was just, like I said in the presentation, I have a bit of a formal process if it's going through a traditional audit. But if normally you're diagnosing a particular issue with log file analysis, so you know what to do in terms of checks and things, you're looking for something specific.
A question for Ruth. Facebook is upgrading Pythia to MMF. Have you tried the code on GitHub yet?
I haven't tried it. I heard they were upgrading it for their vision and language, but I haven't tried it yet. But it's definitely something on my list to try. It looks like it's going to be really good.
Thanks. Another question for Faisal. With log file analysis in ScreamingFrog, what are the events? Is that the request? If there's like two events.
Yeah, I think with events, it's it varies. Yeah, so you get different status codes. There's a couple of different options in there. I just download their free tool and check it out, because I'll be honest with you, I tend to not use that as much anymore, to just use Python. So my memory's a bit dodgy on that one, but I'm pretty sure that's the case.
Yes, thank you. And I think one last question for Faisal. When we get the log files, if we find pages that are not important,
I guess two things. Like, one,
what should we do?
Being crawled often, like there's not really like a set number of times something should be crawled. If it's being crawled a lot, I guess it's understanding why is that being crawled a lot. Is it being internally linked more than it should be? Is there something else going on? I don't know, someone redirected like a subdirectory to that page or something wrong like that. So just understanding like why is that being crawled more than it should. But yeah, it depends on your definition. I guess look at it in context to the rest of the site and how often that's being crawled. If it's incredibly large, then yeah, I'd check it out, see what's going on.
Nice, thank you. I think that's all of the questions. Yeah, it looks like it. So again, you'll all receive a recording of this in, I think it's a couple of hours time, direct from the webinar platform itself. I'll be publishing the slides and the recording as well on my website. So I think that's everything. Just a big thank you to our speakers for sharing their knowledge with us and spending all their time making all of these slides. It takes so long to make. Some of them can take months. So yeah, it's a lot of work that goes into it. So thank you all so much. And thanks to all of the attendees for staying with us today. It's been a record number of attendees for Bristol SEO. And hopefully we can do the event again in June. Ooh. Okay, thank you everyone. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.